You are floating above cold water in a small open boat, engine off. Then something moves beneath you. A shape, longer than the boat, longer than 3 buses end to end. You feel a low vibration in your chest before you see anything. A pulse the water carries through the hull. Then the shadow slides past, heavier than every dinosaur ever dug from the ground. And somehow, size is the least interesting thing about it. This animal should not work. Its heart should fail. Its body should overheat. Its food should barely exist. We were wrong about almost everything. Start with the obvious. The blue whale is the largest animal we know has ever lived on Earth. Not the largest ocean animal, not the largest mammal, the largest, period. Bigger than any tyrannosaur, any sauropod, any ancient marine reptile. Estimates for the biggest sauropods run into the range of 80 tons. A full-grown blue whale can push past 150. Some records suggest even higher. Picture that shape passing underneath you again. Heavier than 30 African elephants stacked into one body. Longer than a basketball court laid on its side. Now here is the first uncomfortable truth. That body should not exist on land. It cannot. If you dropped a blue whale onto solid ground, its own weight would begin crushing its internal organs within minutes. Its ribs would flex inward. Blood would pool. Lungs would collapse under the pressure of muscle and blubber. A stranded blue whale is not just out of its element. It is being killed by its own mass. The largest creature that ever lived cannot survive on land for 1 hour. Water is the loophole. Buoyancy holds this body together. The ocean is doing what no skeleton could ever do on its own. Take the water away and the animal becomes a disaster shaped like a whale, which means every blue whale alive is, in a real sense, a prisoner of the very thing that made it possible. That is the trick. But if water holds this body up, what holds this body running? Because the next problem is worse. Consider the heart. A blue whale heart is roughly the size of a small car. The chest cavity around it is large enough for a person to stand inside. That heart has to move blood through a body more than 30 meters long, out to a tail wider than a garage door, through arteries wide enough for a human head. That should require a heart beating hard, fast, and constantly. It does the opposite. When a blue whale dives, its heart can slow to as low as 2 beats per minute. 2. Your heart just beat. Now wait 30 seconds for the next one. At the surface, the rate climbs, sometimes into the mid-30s. But even at its fastest, that heart is running close to the physical limit of what a muscle that size can do. It cannot be made bigger without losing efficiency. It cannot be made faster without failing, which leads to something almost nobody says out loud. The largest animal that ever lived may not be limited by food, or predators, or oxygen. It may be limited by its own heartbeat. The marvel is not that the heart is huge. The marvel is that it is barely keeping up. And the heart is not the only ceiling. Here is where the story stops sounding the way you were told. In every children's book, the blue whale lives in freezing polar water and has to fight the cold. Blubber, we are told, keeps it warm. That is half true, but it hides the real problem. The real problem is heat. A body that size generates enormous metabolic heat every second it is alive. Muscle, digestion, circulation, all of it produces warmth. Blubber traps that warmth. In freezing water, that helps. But the animal is not sitting still. It is swimming, feeding, diving, migrating. It is running an engine the size of a house inside an insulated jacket that does not come off. So the ocean is not stealing heat from a blue whale. The whale is fighting to dump heat into the ocean. The solution is hidden in the fins and the tail. Networks of blood vessels there act like radiators, running warm blood close to cold water so heat can leak out. In warmer seas, that system starts to hit its limit, which is why blue whales feed in cold water and why warming oceans are not just an ecological concern for them. They are a thermodynamic one. The largest animal alive is not fighting cold, it is fighting itself. That is not the story you were told. So we have a body too big for land, a heart at the edge of what biology allows, and a heat problem hiding inside the very insulation that supposedly keeps it warm, which raises the question that should have been obvious from the start. What could this animal possibly eat in quantities large enough to keep all of this running? Look at the mouth and the answer seems clear. It opens wide enough to swallow a car. A single lunge expands the throat pleats until the lower body looks like a parachute filled with ocean. Water rushes in, a pool's worth of it, in one bite. Then the water rushes back out, through a curtain of bristles hanging from the upper jaw. And whatever is left behind, tiny, twitching, gets swallowed. There are no teeth in that mouth, not one. The deadliest mouth in the ocean has no teeth. The teeth are not the story. The filter is. That filter is called baleen, and it is the trade that made the blue whale possible. Instead of chasing large prey the way orcas do, the blue whale evolved to harvest tiny prey in enormous volume. It does not hunt, it vacuums. In a good day of feeding, a single blue whale can take in something on the order of 4 tons of prey every day. That is not a metaphor, that is the biological requirement, which means the real question is not about the whale at all. It is about what could possibly exist in quantities that large, in patches dense enough to make each lunge worth the energy it costs. The answer is a creature smaller than your finger. Krill. Roughly the size of a paperclip, cold water crustaceans, mostly Euphausia superba in the Southern Ocean, that spend their lives drifting in the upper layers of the sea. Alone, one krill is nothing. It could not feed a small fish for long. It is almost invisible. It has no defenses to speak of, but krill do not live alone. They live in swarms, and krill swarms are one of the strangest concentrations of life on this planet. A single swarm can stretch for kilometers. Some are so dense that they turn the water red for as far as the eye can see. Some are large enough to be picked up by satellites in orbit, showing up as pink stains against the blue. The estimated total biomass of Antarctic krill taken together runs into hundreds of millions of tons. That is more by weight than all the humans on Earth combined. Remember the specs from the beginning. This is why they mattered. The largest animal that ever lived exists only because one of the smallest lives in packs. That single sentence reshapes the whole picture. The blue whale did not become gigantic by chasing bigger prey. It became gigantic by learning how to harvest tiny prey at industrial scale. Its size is not a weapon, it is a delivery mechanism. A mouth this big only pays off if the food comes in clouds this thick. Take away the swarms, and the whole design fails, which is a problem. Because krill swarms are not everywhere, they form seasonally in specific regions driven by cold water, upwelling, and sea ice. Which means the blue whale is not free to live anywhere in the ocean. It is chained to the places where its food concentrates, and most of those places are in cold polar seas. But blue whales do not give birth there. They cannot. The water is too cold for a newborn calf. So the animal built for freezing water has to leave freezing water to reproduce. Every year, blue whales migrate from cold feeding grounds toward warmer breeding grounds. Some travel distances estimated at up to 10,000 kilometers in a year, and they do it while barely eating. There is almost no krill in the warm breeding waters, so the mother whale, who has already spent months eating hard in the polar feeding season, now swims for weeks or months carrying, then nursing, a calf on almost nothing. She burns her own body to keep her calf alive. That calf, meanwhile, is drinking something close to 200 liters of milk a day. Milk so rich in fat it has the consistency of thick paste, closer to soft butter than to what any of us would call milk. The calf gains weight at a pace that sounds made up. Some estimates put it near 90 kilograms of body mass added per day. Picture that. An adult human's worth of weight added to the calf every single day, drawn straight from the mother's fat reserves. She is not eating. He is drinking a bathtub of milk every day, for months. There is no dramatic music in this part of the ocean, no visible struggle. From the surface, it looks like two shapes moving slowly through warm blue water. But inside her body, the math is brutal. Every liter of milk is a piece of her, converted, poured into a calf whose survival depends entirely on how much fat she managed to store before she left the cold. If she did not eat enough last season, this calf may not make it. If the krill were thin that year, that thinness is arriving now, months later, at the surface of a tropical sea, as a weakness she cannot fix. The largest animal on Earth spends part of every year slowly starving on purpose. Not because it is trapped, because it is a mother. That is what building the next generation costs when your body is this size and your food only lives at one end of the planet. Now step back and look at what we have. A body only water can hold together, a heart at its limit, an overheating engine wrapped in fat, a mouth without teeth, a food supply built out of specks, a migration that burns the mother down to feed the calf. Every part of this animal is a compromise stacked on top of another compromise. Every solution created a new problem. Every advantage came with a cost, which raises a question the science is going to answer in a way you may not expect. How did an animal this constrained even come to exist in the first place? Where does a design like this come from? The answer is not in the ocean. It is on land. Roughly 50 million years ago, on the shorelines of what is now Pakistan, a small four-legged mammal was walking into the shallows. It was not much bigger than a wolf. It had a long tail, narrow skull, and legs built for land. Scientists call it Pachycetus, and later Ambulocetus, the walking whale. It ate fish, it waded, it swam, and over the next tens of millions of years, its descendants stopped coming back to shore. Legs shortened, nostrils drifted upward, eventually becoming the blowhole on top of a skull. Front limbs turned into flippers, back legs shrank, and then disappeared from view entirely. The tail flattened, then developed the horizontal fluke you see on every whale today. The body stretched, insulated, expanded, and became something the ocean could hold. But the animal never fully left. Hidden deep inside every blue whale, floating in muscle where nothing connects to them anymore, are small bones. Pelvic bones, vestigial hips, ghosts of legs that walked on land. The largest ocean animal alive is still, structurally, a land mammal that never quite let go of its old body. There is a land animal inside every whale. It never left, which explains something we noticed earlier and never resolved. Why does a creature so perfectly built for water still have to come to the surface to breathe? Why does it overheat like a warm-blooded runner instead of moving heat around like a fish? Because underneath the shape, the biology is still the biology of an ancestor that once had lungs, fur, and paws. The blue whale is not a fish. It has never been a fish. It is a mammal wearing an ocean body, and it still pays taxes to its origins. Now that we know where it came from, we can talk about the world it built around itself. Look at what a blue whale can do that almost nothing else on the planet can. It can send a sound across an ocean. Blue whale calls sit in a very low frequency range, somewhere between 10 and 40 hertz, at the edge of what a human ear can barely register as a rumble. But low frequencies do something strange in water. They travel. In a specific layer of the deep ocean called the SOFAR channel, sound gets trapped between differences in temperature and pressure and bends back on itself instead of dispersing. A low call released into that channel can, in theory, travel for thousands of kilometers before it fades. Think about that. One animal calling once could once be heard on the other side of an ocean basin. The loudest voice on the planet is not on land. It is under the water, using a highway built by physics. That should be impossible. But the ocean built the highway. Except now that highway has traffic. Modern shipping runs on the same low-frequency band that whales use. Engines, propellers, ballast, hulls. The background noise in many ocean basins has risen dramatically over the last century, and when the background rises, the effective range of a whale's voice collapses. A call that used to reach across a basin may now reach across a fraction of one. The loudest animal on Earth is being drowned out by cargo ships, which matters more than it sounds, because these are animals that live spread thin across enormous distances. If they cannot hear each other, they cannot find each other. And if they cannot find each other, breeding populations start to break down invisibly, long before anyone counts the bodies. If their voice is failing, what else is? Follow the whale below the surface for a moment. It is diving to feed. It stays down for 10-20 minutes at a time, gorging on krill in cold water. Then it climbs back up, breathes, and does something almost nobody talks about in polite documentaries. It defecates at the surface. The plume is enormous, bright orange, iron-rich. And this is where a grotesque detail turns into one of the most important reveals in the whole story. The open ocean, far from land, is starved of iron. Phytoplankton, the microscopic plants that drift near the surface, need iron to grow. Without it, blooms stall. With it, they explode. And phytoplankton are not a side note. They photosynthesize. They pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They release oxygen. Estimates suggest they produce something on the order of half the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. 1 out of every 2 breaths you take began with something like this. Blue whales feed deep, in the cold, then surface into sunlit water and release iron directly into the layer where phytoplankton live. Researchers call this the whale pump. Fewer whales, less iron delivery, less iron, weaker blooms. Weaker blooms, less carbon captured, less oxygen produced, less food for krill, less food for krill. Read that again. The whale eats krill. The whale's waste feeds phytoplankton. Phytoplankton feed krill. The whale is farming its own food supply by digesting it and releasing it in a form the ocean can use. The largest animal alive helps produce the air we breathe by pooping at the surface. That sounds ridiculous. It is also real, and it means killing a blue whale does not just remove one animal. It removes a fertilizer factory. It removes a link in a loop that feeds phytoplankton, which feed krill, which feed the whales themselves, and along the way, quietly feed the atmosphere we live in, which raises the last biological question. If the living whale feeds the ocean, what happens when it dies? Picture a body, 150 tons of it, sinking. It falls slowly through the sunlit layer, past the twilight zone, into total darkness. Thousands of meters down, it lands on the seafloor with a soft impact almost nothing witnesses. In the deep sea, this is a miracle. The abyss is starving. Very little food falls that far down. Most animals there survive on a slow rain of tiny particles drifting from above, and then, suddenly, 150 tons of fat, muscle, and bone arrive at once. It is called a whale fall, and it can support an entire ecosystem for decades. First come the scavengers, sharks, hagfish, amphipods, stripping the soft tissue. That phase can last months, sometimes years. Then a different community takes over, worms and crustaceans that live in the enriched sediments around the carcass. Then, once only bone is left, the specialists arrive. Ossidax, the so-called bone-eating worms, sink root-like structures into the skeleton and extract lipids trapped inside. Some whale falls remain biologically active for 50 years or longer, an ecosystem the size of a small town, powered entirely by one corpse. The death of the giant is not an ending. It is the birth of an entire hidden world. which means every blue whale that dies in the open ocean and sinks is feeding creatures that will never see the sun and that most humans will never learn the names of. And it means that if whales become rare enough, the deep sea, quietly, gets hungrier. An entire food chain that depends on giant carcasses starts to thin out in a place nobody is watching. If fewer whales sink, an entire deep sea system starves in the dark. And that brings us to the part of the story that stops being biology and starts being a wound. 200 years ago, the ocean sounded different, louder in the low frequencies where whales speak, denser with krill in some regions, thinner in others, but everywhere shaped by the presence of enormous bodies moving through it. Pre-industrial blue whale populations are hard to know exactly, but estimates commonly suggest something on the order of 200,000 to 300,000 animals in the southern hemisphere alone before we came for them. Today, global estimates for all blue whales are usually placed somewhere between roughly 10,000 and 25,000. Take that in. For every blue whale alive today, there may have been 10 or more alive before industrial whaling arrived. The ocean is quieter now, less fertile in some places, and less balanced. The biggest change in ocean biology in centuries is not something new arriving. It is something huge disappearing. That silence is not natural. We made it because the 20th century did something no predator, no ice age, and no asteroid ever managed. It industrialized whaling, explosive harpoons, factory ships that processed carcasses at sea, fleets that could work through polar summers without ever coming to port. In the southern hemisphere alone, records suggest something on the order of 340,000 blue whales were killed in the 20th century, mostly between the 1920s and the 1960s. Some single decades killed more blue whales than exist alive on the planet today. The largest creature that ever lived was almost erased, not by predators, not by climate, not by asteroids, but by us, in under a century. The dinosaurs had 165 million years. The blue whale had us for less than 100. And here is the piece that hurts. We did not hunt them because they were dangerous. We hunted them for oil for lamps, for margarine, for soap, for corset stays, for fertilizer, for pet food, for industrial lubricants, for profit. The animal that helps oxygenate the ocean got turned into candles and cleaning products. In 1966, the International Whaling Commission finally granted the blue whale protection. By then, in some regions, the population had dropped by more than 99%. In parts of the Southern Ocean, they had gone from tens of thousands to a few hundred. The species was, biologically speaking, at the edge. They are still there. Recovery has been slow, uneven, and fragile. Some populations are showing tentative signs of return, others are barely detectable, and on top of that, they still face ship strikes, entangled fishing gear, chemical pollution, and warming water that shifts krill distributions in ways their migration cycles are not designed for. The wound is not closed. It is just being watched. Now go back to the boat. You are still floating on the surface. The engine is still off. And the shape is still there, moving beneath you, unhurried, calm. You know what you are looking at now. You are looking at a body only water can hold together, a heart running near its physical ceiling, a radiator built into fins because the real problem is heat, not cold, a mouth without teeth built to strain specks out of the sea, a food chain that runs on creatures smaller than your finger, a migration that starves the mother to feed the calf, a land mammal that never fully came back, a voice built to cross oceans, now competing with ships, a living animal whose waste helps produce the air you are breathing right now, a future corpse whose body will feed a hidden city in the dark for half a century after it dies. And you are looking at a survivor of an extinction event we caused, still here, still doing all of it. The shadow slides past. You feel that low pulse in your chest one more time. Then the water settles behind it, and the boat is quiet again. It is not the silence of an empty ocean. It is the silence of an ocean that used to hold 10 times more of these animals than it does now, and might, if we let it, hold them again. That is what we almost lost. That is what is still moving beneath us.